side. So thanks everyone for being here. We really appreciate it. Welcome to this event, which is put on jointly by the GSACEP's advocacy and membership committees, as well as with support of the GSEMRA organization for medical students and residents in the military. We're really, really honored today to have with us Charlie Kels, who I'll read his bio very shortly, but who is an incredibly experienced and accomplished federal lawyer with time in uniform and out of uniform, working across many different agencies, and who will be speaking with us about policies on political activities for military and federal service physicians. So many of you who are here probably have some interest in getting involved and advocating for policy change or supporting different viewpoints, especially amongst, the various changes that go on a day-to-day basis in the federal government. And so this talk is really aimed at making sure that you have an idea of what those left and right boundaries might be and how to make sure that you are protecting yourself while also being most effective at advocating for change in the way that is beneficial to you, your organization, and to the government at large. So thank you very much for being here. I'll start by, or continue by introducing Charlie. Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Kels is a JAG in the Air Force Reserve and a senior attorney at the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Health Security. He's previously worked in senior legal roles for the American Medical Association, the Defense Health Agency, the Army Medical Center of Excellence, and the Department of State's Bureau of Medical Services. Lieutenant Colonel Kels has written extensively about issues at the intersection of medicine, law, and national security, and he has again been very generous to offer his time to speak with us today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, sir, to share your slides and get us started.
Well, thanks so much, Ryan. And you can hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Thank you so much for having me and for coming up with this and organizing it. Let me share my slides. And before I start talking, let's see, I think I'll have to put it into presentation mode. So let me start by sharing and then start it as a slideshow. Okay. Does that look good to everyone?
Yeah, looks good to us. And for those
Perfect.
online, if you have questions, feel free to send them into the chat and we can address them at the end.
Yeah, please jump in anytime. Feel free to interrupt me. The one thing when I go into presentation mode on these things, I can never like see what's going on or the comments. So Ryan or anyone else, please feel free to interrupt me anytime. I know it's late, so I'll try not to talk at you for too long and to allow as much discussion as possible and be cognizant of your time. First off, congratulations to Ryan on your upcoming graduation. That's super exciting and excited to see you here in San Antonio. To everyone gracious enough to spend their time with us tonight, thank you for what you do, taking care of service members and their families, veterans, and others. There's no higher calling, so it's an honor to be with you. I definitely won't bore you with my autobiography. I'll just say two quick things. In my experience working for and with physicians and clinicians, physicians want to take care of patients. And so I've always seen my job as trying to cut away as much as I can all of the things that get in the way of that. Whether I've been successful at that or how successful, I don't know, but that's always the way I've seen my job working for and with physicians. So hopefully this endeavor is a kind of a little bit of a part of that. And then last thing I'll just say, secondly, in my experience, being a JAG is just like the TV show from the 1990s. The only real difference is that in real life, we're better looking. So. Um, I will start and end with this slide, which is, for those who remember, this is Dana Carvey's impersonation of the first President Bush, where in response uh, to most any issue that comes up, he would say, "Not going to do it, wouldn't be prudent." Right? And I'd be remiss if I didn't start with that distinction. What is legally permissible versus what is prudent? And the question, can I, is oftentimes a different question from should I. The law is a limited field, a limited specialty. It can tell you left and right limits. It can't tell you what the right thing to do is all the time. And so the sweet spot that we're always looking for, right, if there's like a Venn diagram, is to have your conduct and our speech be legal, ethical, and wise, right? But those are three different things. What's legal may not be ethical, what's ethical may not be wise. And so, in the context of operational law, what is a lawful target may not be a target that actually advances the war effort. And so those are two different things. And Obviously, in the best case scenario, we're in that Venn diagram when what we're doing checks all those boxes, is legal, ethical, and wise. We've all on this call in one way or another chosen government service in some way, shape, or form, right? None of us are conscripts. And whether your background is ROTC or one of the service academies or USIS or HPSP, we in many ways owe our livelihoods to the government and the taxpayers, and we've taken it upon ourselves to be nonpartisan public servants. And so there may be, at times, we don't cease to be citizens, but there can be personal consequences sometimes because we engage with the government not just as citizens, but as employees or service members. And so there's obviously a distinction, not always a legal distinction, but certainly a prudential distinction between fighting for truth, justice, and the American way as a citizen, and fighting for truth, justice, and the American way while receiving a government paycheck. And it's always good to keep that in mind and to just remember that the legal question is part of the equation, but is certainly not all of it. Um, just some disclaimers. I am giving this. They've been kind, Ryan and the organization was kind enough to extend to me the invitation, but I'm doing this in my personal capacity. The references to relevant policies are cited and publicly available, and this presentation is for general informational purposes. This is like a teaching and conversational presentation. It does not constitute legal advice. Please, if you have questions about specific activities, it is always a good idea to consult your servicing ethics advisor. And so for those on active duty or in a reserve or guard capacity, that will be your local servicing legal office. For those on the line who may work for VA or DHS or HHS, that will be your assigned OGC counsel. Um, and in addition, you should theoretically and hopefully get annual ethics briefs. I know because I have to give them a lot. And there shouldn't be anything I say that is inconsistent with that. But if there is, please defer to your assigned unit ethics advisor giving the brief, not to me. So again, my hope is that there should not be anything inconsistent here. Um, but I do want to assure you that I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so everything is good and well. I've often said actually people would probably pay more attention to the ethics brief if the lectures on ethics were not given by lawyers, right? That probably would increase the attention and the deference given to it. Um, just in general, this is a famous quote from General George Washington was he when he was named the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And so in 1775, when he was ensuring the New York Provincial Congress that he would not usurp civilian power through military tyranny, he said, "When we assumed the soldier, we did not lay aside the citizen." And so whatever federal or public service we've embarked upon, we remain citizens to include the rights and responsibilities of citizens. So some key themes that you'll see throughout. The first is that First Amendment rights apply. We still have First Amendment rights, but they may be subject to a balancing test with military or government interests in our role as service members or employees. So government personnel action does implicate the First Amendment in a way private employer action does not. With some limits, if you work for a private employer, you can be fired at any time and for any reason. Obviously, there are limits and state law on that. If there's a question out there, please interrupt me and let me know. So, if you live in Texas, for example, it's an at-will employment state. And basically, as long as it's not a facially unlawful purpose, right? An employer has the right to fire an employee at any time for any reason, to include for saying or doing things that don't reflect positively on the business. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a difference between content neutral and content-based government restrictions. The former content neutral restrictions regulate the time, manner, and place of speech, but without regard to the content of the speech. And so those, as you can imagine, have a lower legal burden for the government to be able to do that and have those be valid. as long as the government is not saying what you can say, but saying that there may be places or times in our roles as employees or service members that we can't say it, the government has a lower burden to meet. And then finally, there's a difference between criminal and administrative action. An administrative or employment action typically has less of a burden and less required due process than a criminal action. So before I jump into just some of the rules, I thought this would be kind of some interesting background for you. Many of the key cases in this area actually intersect with medicine, which is kind of interesting given the discussion we're having tonight in the context of a medical professional society. So kind of the seminal case with respect to the validity of UCMJ speech actions. So the ability of the government in its role as in its command role to restrict at times the speech of service members. One of the seminal cases is Parker v. Levy. Dr. Howard Levy was an Army captain stationed at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, as the hospital's chief of dermatological service. He was a dermatologist and he had taken a deferral and a scholarship program to enter the service after his residency. As part of his duties there, he was ordered to train Special Forces medics to train Green Berets on certain dermatological field procedures, and he refused, citing medical ethics and alleging that Special Forces were committing war crimes. He advocated to enlisted personnel that they refuse to deploy or fight in Vietnam due to both the immorality of the war and racial discrimination on the home front. Dr. Levy was convicted at court-martial for failure to obey a lawful order, for conduct unbecoming, and for conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. He was sentenced to dismissal, forfeiture of pay and allowances, and 3 years confinement. He challenged the charges on First Amendment grounds for overbreadth, and the case, which is pretty rare, but it does happen. Every term, there's oftentimes one or two military cases that make it up to the Supreme Court. The court ruled that military law regulates a wider array of activities than in civilian life, and that service members, by the nature of being in the military, have less autonomy. And so the court wrote that his conduct, that of a commissioned officer publicly urging enlisted personnel to refuse to obey orders which might send them into combat, was unprotected under the most expansive notions of the First Amendment. And the court, and this is I put the famous one of the most famous lines on the slide here, that this court has long recognized that the military is by necessity a specialized society separate from civilian society. Dr. Levy, thankfully, he did serve his time, but at Leavenworth, but he went on to have a successful career in medicine. He was the longtime director of dermatology at the Lincoln Medical and Mental Health Center in the Bronx. So let's fast forward 2 decades and to the civilian sector. Now, this course will be very surprising to you, right? This never happens. Physicians and nurses bickering about staffing and management at hospitals. That never happens. So I don't know how this case even came to be. So in this case, this is in the civilian sector. A nurse working at McDonough District Hospital, a public hospital in Illinois, was fired after making critical remarks about the obstetrics department to another nurse considering transferring there. She alleged that her First Amendment free speech rights were violated and that the termination was in retaliation for what she said. And she said that what she said was protected by the First Amendment because staffing at public hospitals is a matter of public importance. And the court said, to be protected, the speech must be a matter of public concern, and the employee's interest in expressing herself on this matter must not be outweighed by any injury the speech could cause to the interest of the state as an employer in promoting the efficiency of the public services it performs through its employees. So the key distinction here that the court made, and again, this one went all the way to the Supreme Court, so it's one of the the key cases in these matters is the distinction between the government as an employer and the government as sovereign or the government as ruler, right? And the court held that the government as employer has far broader powers than does the government as sovereign. And so when someone who is paid a salary so that she will contribute to an agency's effective operation begins to do or say things that detract from the agency's effective operation, the government employer must have some power to restrain her. And in this case, restraint was dismissal through the state civil service system. Okay. So now that we kind of got probably some of the most interesting, I think, background part out of the way, here's just a brief overview of a little bit of the rules that I'll go over for you, and then hopefully leave time for discussion and that you'd like to have. First, again, a politically neutral military, right? And here is a memo. This was towards the end of the last administration, so before the last presidential election of the Deputy Secretary of Defense, highlighting the importance of a politically neutral Department of Defense, not Department of War, because political neutrality is what will maintain the trust of the American people in the armed forces, and that goes, obviously for civilian agencies as well. But however, as you can see from these photos, we obviously don't always get it right. These images are particularly powerful because they directly associate the military with a political viewpoint, giving the impression that the armed forces prefers one political ideology over another. These are the kind of things that can erode the trust of citizens and elected officials and in the military as an institution. This would apply as well again for civilian agencies, but it's obviously conspicuous because of the uniform in the military context. Okay, so why political neutrality? Why is this a fundamental principle? First, members of the armed forces swear an oath to uphold the Constitution, as do civilian employees, not to any one person or to any one political party. Now, it's important to note the enlisted oath does include a reference to obeying the orders of the commander-in-chief, but that's in recognition of the president's place at the top of the chain of command, not as one person. And second, civilian control of the military is a foundational principle of American democracy, going back to that George Washington quote a few slides ago. And this concept only works when civilian leadership has confidence that the military will carry out their lawful orders, regardless of agenda or political views. All right, a few definitions as we get into it. And this matters because it goes to what the rules sometimes allow or prohibit. But as you can see, these definitions are not always crystal clear. So a partisan political activity is an activity supporting or relating to candidates who represent or issues specifically identified with national or state political parties. A nonpartisan political activity um, um, is, on the other hand, supports or relates to candidates not representing or issues not specifically identified with national or state political parties. So again, like some elections are nonpartisan, at least technically. So some like school boards and judges, and even some mayoral elections are technically nonpartisan as well. And then breaking that down further, political versus social issues. Um, Political statements are directed at the success or failure of a candidate for elective office or an issue that will be decided by the political process, like a ballot initiative. A social issues are not closely associated with the position of any one political party or ones that will not be decided by the political process. So they may be contentious, but by definition, they are not political. And examples of these issues, right? And you can say, if you think about it, and the reason why these are not always crystal clear is, when I say some of these issues, you'll say, oh, no, but I do associate that with a political party, right? But not so they can be contentious, but they are not strictly political issues versus social issues. And examples of those include the Second Amendment, reproductive rights, and conflicts in the Middle East or the conflict in Russia or Ukraine. Technically, it's only when someone ties a social issue to a particular candidate or cause, or when such discussion would cause disruption in the workplace, that the rules on political activities would be implicated, right? So there's a difference between talking about views on reproductive rights versus saying the president's views on reproductive rights are why everyone should vote for him in November. The latter is a political statement because it's directed at the success of or failure of a candidate. But the actual issue, reproductive rights, is a social issue, not purely a political issue. Okay. So what are the relevant rules or sources of authority here? For service members, it's Department of Defense Directive 1344.10. For civilians, it's the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act is a statute enforced by the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, which is an independent agency within the federal government, so it doesn't fall under any other department or agency. The Department of Defense Directive is a regulation. It is a punitive regulation. That is, it is a lawful order for UCMJ purposes, so that violation thereof can be an Article 92 violation under the UCMJ for failure to obey a lawful order or regulation. The services have implementing regulations, but I know this is a joint audience, so I will confine the discussion to the DoD or now DOW directive. Um, let's see. Okay. So just a couple things here, right? Reservists generally, I won't get too much into this. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to kind of go deeper. Reservists or guard typically have to be in either a Title 10 or a Title 32 status for these regulations to apply. When guard members are in a state status, they typically fall under state regulations, which sometimes mirror this. But in a purely state status, what's called SAD or state active duty, the federal regulations don't apply. But I won't go more into that unless anyone has questions. Um, Okay, so what does the kind of the scheme for the rules look like? So you have the Hatch Act on one side and then the Department of Defense directive on the other. Under the Hatch Act, there are two groups. There are less restricted employees and further restricted employees. Now, the likelihood is that most everyone on this call who's civilian is going to be a less restrictive employee, which in general terms means GS-15 or below. So we may have some SESs on the line, and if so, you will fall into the left category as to more restricted. But for the most part, most civilian employees will be there on the right side. And so those individuals are less restricted in their political activities than military members. And so the best way to think of it as kind of a rule of thumb is that military members and further restricted civilians, that is typically SES or above, have very similar rules. Whereas most civilian employees, GS-15 and below, will fall in the less restricted category and have less restrictions on their political conduct than military members do. Let's see. And so this is pretty much reiterating that. But again, active duty service members and further restricted civilian employees, the rules are going to look very similar. Less restricted civilians are going to have, as you might imagine, less restrictions, fewer restrictions. Okay, so as a general rule, right, personnel, military, civilian, across the board, regardless of restriction level, should not engage in prohibited partisan political activities and should avoid the inference that their personal political activities imply or appear to imply agency sponsorship, approval, or endorsement of a political candidate, campaign, or cause. Now here, right, two words kind of are key, right? Prohibited. So that is that especially for less restricted civilians, there are certain partisan political activities that are allowed. And then personal is important because pretty much every political activity that we undertake, whether as GS employees or as service members must always be in a personal capacity. And the onus is on us to make that clear, and also not to use government time or government resources to further those personal political activities. All right. So the biggest takeaways, right? As you can imagine, everyone can vote and everyone can encourage others to vote and is encouraged to vote. Everyone gets to have a personal political opinion, but they need to make it clear that that personal opinion is your own. Now, whether discussing politics is the best way to make and keep friends, I will defer to you on. But nonetheless, you have every right to have one and to make your political opinions known. We can never wear a uniform at a political event of any kind, whether a partisan or nonpartisan event, right? And so this applies to military, but it would also apply to civilian employees who may wear a uniform like CBP or something like that, Customs and Border Patrol. We can never, no one can solicit funds or solicit votes, and no one can engage in political activities in the workplace, on government times, or using government resources. And a big thing, as you can imagine, that came up a lot, especially during the COVID time period, was telework. When individuals are teleworking during business hours, they are on government time and off typically on government equipment. But their site of telework via their telework agreement is their place of work. And so for those times that they're on duty, even if they're on a break, they need to treat that as if they are in a government building. Okay, so what other permissible things that all civilians and service members can do? A couple of these we talked about. They can register to vote and vote, encourage others to participate, sign a nominating petition for a candidate or for legislation as a private citizen, express a personal political opinion in one's personal capacity, and to ensure to make clear that it is not as a representative of the armed forces or of your agency or of the U.S. government. This is about this last two here is going to be about commander authority over bases, right? I wish I could gain back the time in my life that I've spent on bumper stickers and yard signs, but when a POV is driven on base, it can have one political bumper sticker. And you can get away with one political bumper sticker per race, right? Like one for president, one for Senate. Um, but um, but it can't exceed that in size or in amount. And again, this is not about what you can do to your own car, which is your business. It's about the fact that the car is driven on base or onto government facilities. And then in off-base residences, obviously individuals can display a publicly visible campaign yard sign. Now, commanders can say no to that and do say no to that in on-base residences if you live in on-base housing. What else can we all do? This is maybe a dying art, much like newspapers themselves, right? But everyone can write a letter to the editor expressing their personal views or an op-ed. Um, that letter cannot solicit votes for or against a political party or partisan cause or candidate, and a disclaimer may be required under the ethics rules. And that's why you see those disclaimers, like even if you read like the inside cover of Military Medicine, right? It'll have a disclaimer that the views presented by the authors are their own. Everyone can attend, but not necessarily participate in political fundraisers and rallies. As you'll see on the next slide, less restricted civilians can actually participate. Military members and more restricted civilians cannot, but everyone can attend. And everyone can donate money to a political organization, party, or committee in their personal capacity. Attendance, again, just to hone in on that second bullet again, can never be in uniform. Okay, so here are the things that less restricted civilians, so GS 15 and below, can do that service members or SES or presidential appointees cannot do. They can volunteer to work for partisan political campaigns. They can attend and be active, that is, speak at political rallies and meetings in their personal capacity. They can join and hold office in a political party or organization. So not civic elective office, which is another category, but in a political party or organization. They can work at the polls on election day for a candidate for a partisan political office. They can assist in partisan registration, voter registration drives, but never in the workplace. And they can organize and speak at political fundraisers, but they cannot solicit donations and they can't associate it with their official position. So these are things less restricted civilians can do, service members may not under the directive. Um, the we've so now we've covered what is permissible. Let's talk a little bit about what's prohibited. Um, Wearing your uniform to a political event, whether partisan or no, or nonpartisan, is just a flat prohibition. Using official authority to influence or to affect the outcome of an election, to solicit or coerce votes or otherwise influence a subordinate is prohibited. And engaging in any sort of partisan political activity in a federal workplace, including on one's personal device while in a federal workplace. And as you can imagine, that's where some of the telework issues came in. So that includes no display of campaign materials in the workplace and no use of government resources. Issues come up, right? Like if can you have a picture of the president on your desk? Obviously, yes, the official presidential photo, but not when the president is only a candidate and not yet the president. Okay. Here are some additional um, um, prohibited activities um, for, again, this applies to everyone, for all civilians and service members. So, displaying a large partisan political sign in on-base housing, obviously what you do off-base in your house is your choice, or anything larger or more voluminous than a bumper sticker on a POV driven on base. Um, to be a candidate except as authorized for or holding a civilian office. Service members generally have to be approved by the relevant service secretary to hold a nonpartisan elective office. Civilians can run for nonpartisan offices and as an independent in accordance with OPM guidance. And um, it is also prohibited for all members, whether civilian or military, to solicit, accept, or receive political contributions, right? So even though less restricted civilians have the ability to publish or make certain like partisan calls, they cannot actually be involved in soliciting or accepting political contributions. These are prohibitions that apply specifically to service members and further restricted civilians. So this is the flip side, right, of the slide before that said the things that only less restricted civilians can do. This is the flip side of that. This is what service members and further restricted civilians, SES and up, cannot do. Participate in a political fundraiser. Again, participation is anything more than mere attendance, even if not in uniform. And if you remember, less restricted civilians can participate, but cannot solicit or accept funds. Um, a service member can never speak before a partisan political gathering, whether in or out of uniform. As you can see here on the left, being in uniform makes it a lot worse. And a service member cannot march or ride in a partisan political parade. And so I included there on the bottom right, that is from Kramer when he refused to wear the ribbon in the Seinfeld where he marched in a parade.
Hey,
Okay,
Charlie, I'm
first,
sorry to pause you real quick.
please.
There's been a couple of distinctions between attendance and participation.
Yes.
Can you clarify that distinction any further?
Um, yes, so I think the The best way to do it is, let me see. I will stop sharing real quick. So we're talking about partisan political gatherings. So I will leave, let me stop the share right here for a sec. And let me um, open up actually, just so I give you the verbiage from the source. Okay.
And since we're pulling up the verbiage from the source, um, partisan is explicit, like, like for example, like a mom's demand action or a no kings versus Democratic convention or
Right.
Republican convention.
So I think it's fair to say that BLM or No Kings or something of that nature would not technically be a partisan political activity. Um, Now, that being said, there are other issues, and at the end, I will get into protest activities, and so I will get into that. But yes, whereas like the DNC or the RNC or a campaign rally for a partisan political candidate, that would be a partisan political event. A march or a protest under a advocacy group for an issue would not technically be partisan, but there is a secondary issue to that. There's also tertiary issues specifically for medical providers, but the secondary issue to that would be protest activities, and I will get to that in in towards the end. Okay, let me see here if I can just pull up the source here so I don't shoot from the hip for you. Let's see here. Okay. Um, okay. So essentially, let me pull up the reg. Essentially, participation is anything other than mere attendance. That's like the short answer to your question is a service member can attend a partisan political rally, but that's pretty much it. They cannot have an active speaking or organizing role. Um, I wanted to try to read from the reg to you. Course, everything is always slower when you're looking for it, right? But that is essentially the distinction here. Um, and I can always follow up with you and send you the language if I can't find it right now. But let's see here. Okay. So so I'm looking, this is Doty 1344.10, paragraph 4.1.1.9. And this is under the list of activities that a member of the armed forces on active duty may do, right? And they say attend partisan and nonpartisan political fundraising activities, meetings, rallies, debates, conventions, or activities as a spectator when not in uniform and when no inference or appearance of official sponsorship, approval, or endorsement can reasonably be drawn. So essentially, it's as a spectator. Does that answer the question?
I think so. It just seems like such a like a nuance between uh a mere attendee,
Hmm.
does that mean that a mere attendee versus involvement in the organization is a little
Right.
more delineated. So,
Yeah, I mean,
thank you.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think essentially if it's a partisan political event, as a military member or as an SES and above, anything other than just waiting in line and watching and listening, it probably would be best in general to steer clear of under the rules. I think the general rule is that, attendance is as a spectator, and anything more than that is active participation. I don't think that that would
No, no
preclude
hooting and
clapping or
hollering.
something, is it? I'm sorry?
No hooting and hollering.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, again, this is where it can get, a little bit difficult to distinguish at the edges, polite clapping versus hooting and hollering. I don't know. And this is again goes to the prudence slide, right? Um, are you hooting and hollering to the extent that you're going to be in a clip that goes viral, or are you just one of the crowd clapping politely? I would imagine, th those things matter probably, if not necessarily from a legal standpoint, certainly from a practical standpoint. Let's see. Did anyone else have any other questions before I kind of bring up the slides again? All right, let me try this one more time here.
I think we've got one from
One more,
Kevin.
yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Kevin Durgan. I'm one of the other attendees over at BMC. In terms of attendance, as medical providers, we sometimes provide like event medicine services, and that could be involved with sort of the coordination for setting up things like certain conventions or protests or anything like that. Is that considered a step too far if we were like contacted or part of the like medical services component of like responding or providing services to an event like that?
So this is, so I mean there, well, I have a slide on this at the end. So I don't know if you want me to hold
Happy
and
to hold.
and
There's,
and get to that.
yeah.
It's an excellent question. I think the short answer is um, there are various issues to think about with that. Um, some have to do with partisan political activities. Some have to do with off-duty employment, which is not based on whether you're remunerated, right? Off-duty employment includes volunteer activities. Um, so there are a number of issues there. It is, I think, strictly speaking, in terms of this subject, right? If it is a partisan political gathering, so for example, a campaign rally, right, for a partisan political candidate, and your involvement was to include being a member of the medical team involved in providing surveillance or medical surveillance or services. I think to say that that is mere spectator or mere attendance, I don't think is a reasonable interpretation, that that would be active participation. Now, some of the other things you mentioned may not be partisan political activities, right? That those may be kind of social movements. And again, that raises a separate issue of protest activities. And so I will get to that at the end. So hopefully that's like a partial answer, and again, it's always I want to reiterate again, obviously, the short answer to all these things obviously is if there are questions, talk with your chain of supervision and command, and then they will probably advise you to go talk with an ethics advisor. But the longer answer, just in terms of this background educational forum, I'll get to a little more of that. So I guess the initial answer there is, yeah, the distinction between a partisan political event and a non-partisan political event, but with the former, with the partisan political event, I think being part of the organization or team certainly it goes beyond mere attendance. All right. Let me bring this up again if I can. Okay. Oop, I think, all right, let me go back, see if I can get it to go back to the show from currents. Um, let's see. Oh, okay. Yeah, and I was just going to say that for military members, the directive has a catch-all provision, right? That any activity that may be reasonably viewed as directly or indirectly associating the department or your service with a partisan political activity is otherwise contrary to the spirit and intent of the directive shall be avoided. So again, that kind of captures the prudence notion. Okay. Um, for military members, a few things to keep in mind, right, that don't apply to anyone else is there are UCMJ articles that may apply to service members in the context of prohibited political activities. Obviously, these will be fact driven, but it's always good to remember the UCMJ is worldwide jurisdiction, right? So it's not like it's based on your status as active duty or your status as an activated or federalized reservist or guard. It's not like state law where, you cross the line and you're no longer subject to it. It applies 24 hours a day worldwide. For if we have anyone in the USPHS Commission Corps on the line, when assigned to the Department of War or to Coast Guard, right, part of the paperwork you'll get is informing you that you are subject to the UCMJ for the duration of that detail. But here are just some of the relevant articles. Article 88, contempt towards officials, so contemptuous words about certain officials in the chain of command. This applies to commissioned officers only, not enlisted. Article 89, disrespect toward a superior commissioned officer. Article 92, failure to obey a regulation. And again, as I mentioned, the directive 1344.10 is a lawful order or regulation subject to Article 92. And then the general article, Article 134, is for misconduct that discredits the service or is prejudicial to good order and discipline. All right. I won't belabor these because I know it's late and you've all probably been seeing patients since like 7 a.m. or depending on your shift. Right. But like the takeaway from these, again, is you'll notice that military members and the more restricted civilian employees, the answers look very similar, whereas less restricted employees have some more leeway and fewer restrictions. And again, this is, I think, the question that we were talking about before, the second from the bottom, right? Participate in partisan fundraisers and events, right? And the answer to that, again, partisan, but the answer to that is no for military members and more restricted, but may attend. Right. So you cannot participate, but you may attend. And I think kind of in response to the last question, I think it's best in general to take a plain language view of that, right? That attend means attend, right? Attending a basketball game, you don't go on the court and play, right? As much as you may want to. Okay. This is just another, again, I won't belabor it. This is another just pictorial, right? This comes, I can send you the link if anyone wants it. This is a less restricted versus a further restricted or service member. And then again, you see the differences, but the two at the bottom are the two that no one can do, right? No one can solicit, accept, or receive political contributions, and no one can use official government equipment or time. All right. These ones are for service members specifically. And again, so this is what the environment looks like for service members or the more restricted employees. And this is kind of just another graphic showing that. Again, I can send you the link for that if you want of what we can and cannot do. Kind of just going to the two earlier questions here, right under the may category, the second from the top, attend partisan and nonpartisan political fundraising activities in civilian clothes and in a private capacity. What you cannot do, you cannot attend them in uniform. And you cannot, let's see if it's written here, you cannot participate in them as an active member. All right. Just a few words about social media. Basically, the takeaway is that the political activity rules apply to social media use. Most of the rules are from a pre-social media environment, and so they need to be translated. And a lot of the things that come up, as you can imagine, are social media driven, right? But the bottom line is we cannot engage in partisan political activity with these accounts, and that reposting or retweeting partisan accounts or partisan posts soliciting votes or contributions can be viewed as publishing partisan solicitations or materials. And again, the same rules apply. We can express our personal views via social media, but what we cannot do is engage in partisan political activity via social media that would otherwise be prohibited. All right. And then again, if anyone wants the link for this, I can send them. This is just a brief overview of do's and don'ts, but the general takeaway is in addition to obviously if you are looking to set up or engage in social media activity that's political in nature and you have questions, you can talk to an ethics advisor at your local legal office. And one of the nice things about that too is that if you rely in good faith on that advice before engaging in it, that provides you a level of protection, right? That the fact that you sought review and then followed the advice. But then the second thing again is that the same rules apply, but in the social media environment. Um, these parts, I was planning to skip over in the interest of time. If there are individuals interested in running for civil office, I'm happy to go over those as well. But I was going to skip to the last topic, which is protest activities. All right. So this is governed by a different Department of Defense regulation. This is a DoD, Department of Defense Instruction 1325.06. Um, there are also service regs. None of them um, um, define specifically what a protest or a demonstration is. Generally speaking, though, a protest or demonstration is going to be a statement or action expressing disapproval or objection to something. And most of these protests or marches, right, are not going to be partisan in the sense that they are not going to be in specific service of a partisan candidate or a partisan organization, but they constitute protest activities, and so that's why they're governed under a different set of rules. Um, and the regulations mandate the preservation of service members' right of free expression to the maximum extent possible, consistent with good order, discipline, and national security. However, the instruction states that commanders need not be indifferent to conduct that would impair their unit's mission or effectiveness. So the DoD charges commanders to exercise calm and prudent judgment and to consult with their staff judge advocate. Again, to as much as possible ensure that service members' rights are preserved consistent with good order and discipline. So the first thing is protest activities on base. And basically, the general rule of thumb here is that military installations are not public forums. So speech activities can be regulated so as to preserve them for their dedicated purposes. And there's a Supreme Court case from 1976 that lays that out. And that goes to kind of one of the first kind of themes I tried to lay out at the beginning in the slide with George Washington, right? That these generally are content neutral speech restrictions. It's not about what's being said, it's about where and when, and essentially not on military bases. Um, for commanders, right, once they open the door to one kind of activity, there may be an essentially a requirement to open the door to all others, right? And so again, that's often why bases are closed off to protest activities. This is the top right is when Kramer decides to protest the mail on Seinfeld, and then the Postmaster General, played by Wilford Brimley, tells him he's not only a postmaster, but he's also a general. All right, off-base protest activities. So outside the installation, service members are prohibited from participating in demonstrations when they are on duty, when they are in a foreign country, when they are in uniform, when their activities constitute a breach of law and order, or when violence is likely to result. And so this is what the DOTI, the instruction, lays out. And so this is why I had kind of answered that second question, just from a general perspective, by saying some of these issues may not have to do with political activities and with 1344.10, but they may implicate the rules regarding protest in 1325.06. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind, right, is service members are generally prohibited from belonging to extremist organizations and participating in extremist activities. So protest activities and extremist activities can overlap, but they are not necessarily one and the same. The DOTI does define extremist activities, and generally speaking, they are ones that advocate or engage in unlawful violence or illegal means to achieve the stated goal of a particular ideology. And that's really the hallmark of what makes an extremist group or an extremist activity extremist, is that they advocate unlawful violence or illegal means in order to achieve their results. So this was in the previous administration, right? If you remember, like extremist groups and extremist activities were a big point of emphasis. But the across the board point is that military personnel are prohibited from actively participating in extremist activities. All right. So here's just one scenario. Um, let's say you're assigned to the 374th Med Group at Yokota, and you hear from a first sergeant that an airman marched in a protest against nuclear weapons that took place in Tokyo last weekend. The member was off duty and not in uniform. I will resist doing the Bueller thing of calling on, right? But the issue to spot here is this is overseas. This is in a foreign country. So even though the member looks like he otherwise complied with the rules, there is a problem here because it's prohibited in a foreign country to participate in a protest activities. If we change the facts and the member engaged in this march, but in the United States, it was likely unobjectionable, right? As long as the member didn't commit any unlawful conduct, was off duty, was not in uniform, and behaved peacefully, and there was no reasonable inference that this protest was going to become violent, then likely we're okay. But to change the facts one more time, what if the demonstration protested one of the candidates for POTUS in this year's presidential election? Well, now it's prohibited because service members cannot march in a partisan political parade, right? So the fact that it's moved from a social issue to a partisan political issue now makes it prohibited. Okay. I did have these are the references. I'm happy to send them out if anyone's interested. Um, I promised that I would end with the same slide that I began with. But the second question that came up, I thought that I know we're running short on time here, but that question might come up. So if you want me to, I guess Ryan, you can give me the go ahead or no, because I know we're at the hour. I had prepared one slide just to remind folks, especially physicians, ER physicians, right, about some of the other issues with serving in a um, on like medical staff as a medical volunteer at protest activities. Did you want me to go into that for a sec, Ryan, or
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll just say first off that if anyone is on the call and has to drop, that's understandable. This is being recorded, so you can catch the last few, continued minutes of the presentation and any questions and answers that come after that on the recording. But we're grateful for you being here. But with that said, please continue, sir.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thank you. Yeah, so just I had mentioned in response to the doctor's question, the second one, right, that there are other issues to think about, right? So okay. So this is from the DHA policy manual on privileging and credentialing, right? Now it uses, because it's like DHA, right, and defers to the services on military personnel matters. They use, right, some like lighter language, like strongly encouraged. You'll find that within the services, it's actually more directive, right? That for example, pre-approval for off-duty employment is required, and that there are specific rules that apply specifically to medical personnel for a number of reasons, including patient safety reasons, right? Like how far you can travel without taking leave, how much rest you have to have before your next shift. I think in the Air Force, I know at least for a long time, the number of clinical hours, I think, was capped at 16 hours. I think it was per week. So anyway, there are various things, and it's more prescriptive than DHA is going to be with respect to service members. Okay, but I just want to remind folks that there are some issues, not just political activity issues and not just protest issues, but also medical legal issues to think about, right? And the biggest here is that federal practice, both military and civilian, comes with a number of protections that are very advantageous to physicians. The first thing is Federal Tort Claims Act coverage, right? The United States government self-insures, um, but it only self-insures for acts or omissions within the scope of employment. So most folks probably listening in do not have a personal medical malpractice insurance policy. And if you are doing off-duty employment, either for extra money or for skills maintenance, etc., right? You likely are getting your malpractice coverage through that off-duty employer. So, um, anything where you're working a medical tent or something like that, you have to think about the fact that if this is not part of your official duties, it's not within the scope of employment, you may lack medical malpractice coverage. Good Samaritan laws vary state by state, but they are generally not applicable when there is a pre-existing duty to provide care, right? So if a physician sees a car crash and stops on the side of the road to assist, that is like quintessential Good Samaritan territory. In fact, that's physician or non-physician, right? If you are walking around with a vest with like a red cross on it that says medical, the likelihood of state Good Samaritan laws adhering is reduced substantially because there's a pre-existing duty and you've identified that via your volunteer service. The second thing to think about, licensure portability. Um, Federal providers, both DoD, VA, and others through different statutes, have portability of licensure. So you may very well be practicing in a state other than the state in which you are licensed. That is not an issue until you're not practicing for the federal government, right? And so state medical boards can treat that seriously, and that actually, practicing without a license or practicing in a state other than where you're licensed can have significant consequences. Again, things to think about. There are certain volunteer provisions that are exceptions to that, right? But they are fact specific. The other thing is most of you probably use a fee-exempt DEA for your controlled substances prescriptions, right? That is for official use only, right? So you could not use the fee-exempt DEA for non-federal duties. Um, and then the final thing, what I mentioned, right, off-duty employment or activity, as you notice there, paid or unpaid, right? Typically, the rules requiring off-duty employment activity um, or activity um, approval by your command, typically that's without respect to whether it's for pay or not, and especially if it's recurring. So if working medical tents in that type of capacity is something, certainly something more than a one-off, right? That's something to think about as well. So I thought that might come up. I just wanted to kind of give you the full breadth of the situation. And then from there, right, there are the other things of, is this a partisan political event? Well, then, right, active participation in that event would be prohibited. Is it a protest event? And again, then you have to think about, right, some of the rules about protest activities. But as a clinician, right, there are some other issues to think about as well. So I want to make sure I keep my promise and with that slide, right, to think about not only what can we do, but what it is prudent to do. And to stop and think, not only can I, but should I is always it never hurts to ask that question. I'm sorry I went over. I hope that was helpful to everyone. And if anyone has any discussion or questions, I'm happy to take it up now or give you my email or whatever and do so later.
Thank you so much, Charlie. That was an incredibly thorough and helpful presentation. We really, really appreciate it.
I
I
appreciate
will
it.
open it up to the room to offer any questions they have either in the chat or to unmute yourself and ask right now.
So I very selfishly got involved in organizing this talk because I have a lot of questions and you've covered the vast majority of them. Thank you so, so much for your time.
My
Uh,
pleasure.
One that is still kind of burning for me is with all of these restrictions in our ability to engage meaningfully in things that are meaningful to us. What would you recommend to a service member? Like for example, as physicians, I think a lot of us have opinions on things like, gun control and abortion, societal level issues, as you've
Mhm.
identified, as opposed to partisan activities. But how would you recommend a service member make their voice heard on these issues when calling your representative feels a little like screaming into the void?
Hmm. Well, I'm not sure that I'm not sure that my kind of recommendation has any specific weight or that I have any qualifications to tell someone who has more education and is more has done more than me of like the best way. I mean, I can give you some examples of certainly of things that um are absolutely um legitimate and hopefully useful ways to approach things, right? I mean, certainly um, writing a article in a professional journal, or even writing an op-ed type piece, as long as you make clear and like include the disclaimer, I think is always a worthy endeavor. Now, of course, I don't think anyone can promise anyone, right, that if they write a piece that then is looked at unfavorably by folks who have authority over you and the ability to impact your career that can't write. I mean, actions have consequences, and I think when we get involved in hot button issues, we have to know that. But I think certainly it's quite clear, in the ethics rules that service members and civilians um, can write, speak, and teach about topics that are within their areas of expertise. And so that is certainly one area. Um, um, I think engagement with nonpartisan movements and organizations is certainly like another avenue or way to do that, right? When obviously, it's we have to keep in mind this has less to do now with the political activities rules than the protest rules. I think, it's important to use common sense of, is this definitely going to be a peaceful march or a peaceful, assembly where folks are learning and dialoguing, or is it something where, the nature of the event is such that you could end up being involved in something you don't want to be in. I think that those are again prudential concerns. But teaching, speaking, and writing, I think is always um, is always a way to engage with those issues. And it kind of falls within the wheelhouse of physicians because they're an excellent opportunity to do that and to educate people. Um, let's see. I'm trying to think if there are any others. But certainly the fact that you're involved in ASAP, right? I mean that's an indicator, right? That you're obviously um, making contributions and doing these things. And so and obviously ASAP is not a partisan political organization. I think
I
go
have one more follow-up that just triggered based on that question.
sure.
Hypothetically, I guess, you get PAO approval of your presentations if you're going in, official capacity lately
Official.
with, some of the higher up interest in like really keeping the message tight.
Mhm.
Uh, they have been starting to say that like when we're going in some of our like civilian capacity to lectures and stuff, they want it to go through approval. I think some of
Mhm.
that's related to going like PTDY or TDY for that stuff.
Right.
Just curious, like some of the like actual like legal or like actual instructions around that and like because that feels like, oh, maybe we would have a hard time like teaching and speaking about certain things if it has to go through approval of command and that it might come up in conflict with some of that stuff you were just talking about.
Yeah, and that's going command because you're going TDY, you said?
For a while for ours, and it's like been up in the air. It was like pretty much any time you were going to go do a presentation. So even if it wasn't funded by the government,
Hmm.
they still wanted approval for it technically, like if you were leaving and giving a
Right.
presentation, which was interesting because it's like, we put our slides like this doesn't reflect the views of the military, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
They were still like requesting that it go through that approval to go to a conference, but on your own time or whatever, or funding.
Right. Right. Um, yeah, I mean, I've seen that as well. Um, and that probably has more to do with like internal command and PA procedures than it has to do likely with like a legal requirement per se. Um, um,
I guess like they can tell us theoretically that they won't give us leave to go do that. It's like with internal command, or can they tell us that we can't give that presentation? I guess is maybe what I'm trying to get to with this conversation or this question.
right.
I recognize there's like a lot of other outstanding things, but just curious your perspective on it.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you like a very like lawyer answer, even though this is the kind of, again, not legal advice, but in the context of like education and background. I mean, I think it depends, right? It is the reason because like it's speaking about the activities of your organization or using materials that you have access to because of your um, official duties? Or are you purely speaking because you're an ED physician and you have expertise in this area and you can educate or speak on this area, right? And so I think that I know it's not a satisfying answer. I think I think it would depend. And I think if it was because the topic was something that maybe they didn't like, potentially the advice would be to make sure the disclaimer is prominent, you know. But I think it would be unlikely for a purely personal presentation in which you're using leave and they're in official capacity, using the disclaimer, not in uniform, and not utilizing or referencing information that you have due to your official duties, right? I think it's unlikely that they would say you can't say that. That would that probably is an unlikely outcome, I would think.
Okay,
Um,
yeah. And it hasn't come up. I just was curious what
yeah.
might happen.
I mean, certainly again, if it's like highly political, your supervisor might have a um, discussion with you, about, the need to be careful or something like that. I can envision that happening.
Yeah, I've been just doing a little bit on reproductive health care, so that's the reason
Mhm.
I was thinking about it. But again, it's like very education based and like so it I was just curious. Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
And yeah, I mean, I mean, that certainly is, I mean, it certainly can be a hot button issue, right? Because I mean, we've kind of seen like a pendulum swing, from one, far on one side to far on the other. Um, and I could see it being something that would be avoided in an official capacity, right? And um, but um, but yeah, I mean, as long as it's a presentation in a personal capacity, not using government resources, and based on your expertise educationally, as opposed to as a Navy physician or something like that. It seems unlikely that there would be a you can't do this, as opposed to maybe just um, you, you know some just reminders of the rules around it.
Thank you, Charlie. I believe Brenda has a question.
Sure.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Hey, sir, my name is Brenda. I'm one of the trauma fellows actually at BAMC.
Oh,
Um,
great.
yeah, thank you so much for this talk. I think your differentiation between partisan and nonpartisan in terms of what we can do is super helpful. But I'm curious, other than like protests and other sort of personal opinions, a lot of the work that I wanted to do kind of involves and then kind of like what Dr. Moran does, like the next step in terms of an organization, like either with the AAST or with the AMA, and that's obviously advocating for certain positions regarding gun control, for example.
Mhm.
But oftentimes in those organizations, more so than just talking about the actual topic, they discuss policy either with political members or political like people in Senate, for example, or even conduct activities like lobbying kind of activities where you go
Mhm.
to Senate or Congress and you go meet with representatives and kind of talk about your views or opinions on policy. Is that kind of a gray area or does that still count as nonpartisan since you're speaking about the topic, even though it's to a political person? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so I don't know like the full I worked at the AMA in their legislative council division for a while, and obviously professional organizations do have a lobbying role, in addition to other roles that they have. Um, um, it, it, direct lobbying by government employees and service members, can raise issues. And I think that the best answer to that is like if you were going to, while still on active duty, and not either as a retiree, 20, 18 years from now or something, or if you're in the reserves and you're doing it in your civilian capacity when clearly not on orders. But if you're still active duty and looking to hold that type of position, I think it would be important to confer with your ethics advisor and get an opinion from them, making sure that that's something that you can do. And in base legal offices, we do that stuff all the time where individuals, are made, a put on the board of some organization, right? And there are various issues we have to go through, from conflict of interest to other things. And so if you were going to take on those type of positions while still active duty, I think it would be important to do that. And then, of course, as you all know better than me, there obviously are, especially with respect to the AMA, there are military physicians who go to the meetings in uniform, like in like an official capacity, right? But then there also are individuals who are there in a personal capacity. And so I think there are distinctions between what they can do. I think the individuals there in their official capacity are likely not going to get up at the reference committee and argue impassioned, about in an issue like that. So, but the short answer, I think, to your question is, if you're going to accept a position or looking to run for a position where it would require you to be in like a lobbying role where you were meeting directly with legislators, I think that's the kind of thing you would want to bring before accepting that position, bring for an ethics review.
That's helpful. Thank you so much.
No problem. Well, if anyone has any follow-up, please let me know. I guess Ryan knows how to get in touch with me, but I also have to give you my email or phone, and try to just send you any resources, or if you do have specific questions about specific activities, to find like your local ethics advisor and send you that way as well.
Thank you so much, Charlie. We really, really appreciate that. For anyone interested in following up, please feel free to reach out and I can get you in touch with him. But again, thankful for your time and looking forward to staying in touch soon. For those who are here, if you want to refer back to any of this, the recording will be on the website by the end of this weekend.
My pleasure. Well, congrats again, and thank you for all for what you do. And if you need to reach out to me, let me know. I guess the ones who are on active duty, you can find me in the global too, with my military address. But Ryan has all my DHS information also.